Oh, ladies and gentlemen, I love everybody because we're finally back with another episode of OC and TJ. It's been a while. Obviously, both of us had a lot of things to attend to. I had a bunch of work, but this guy right here just graduated from college. So we need some W's in the comment section right now. TJ, how's life been?
Life's great, man. Yeah, definitely. I was talking to Colin about this before we went live, but feels weird. But I'm ready for what's ahead. It's been a crazy few weeks. It's what graduation that's what happens. So, but yeah, I'm excited. So,
yeah, you better be, because trust me, it's gonna get. I was literally saying this earlier, but in a few months, that weird feeling where it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have to move in or I don't have to pack for college or anything. That feeling's gonna hit like that. So
yeah.
So for the topic of this show, episode number 23, if you're a basketball fan, it's a great number. We are going to do something a little more fun because we are in the dead period of the offseason. And obviously, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are not at OTAs. Both teams have, been reporting. Some have, taken some time off before training camp. But for now, I wanted to take things in a little bit of a different direction. So a little while ago, we looked back at the 16 Cinderella stories. The teams that came out of nowhere and surprised us with really promising seasons that gave us hope for the future. Some of them won championships, others came up short of their goal. But the whole point of that show was to let everyone know, these teams gave everybody a lot of hope when nobody expected it. So I think for today, we're going to do the exact opposite and look back at some of the biggest disappointments because there are a lot of them. And we're not doing it since 2000, but we're going to do it since 2010 because I think, that was really the time where we really, at our point in our lives, I was like 8 or 9 years old at the time, but it was really at the point where we can realize, oh, wow, the team that was supposed to really make a big move or make a huge playoff push, they didn't even make it to the playoffs or they, somehow backed into it and got completely blown out of the wild card game. So I think that's the show that we're going to do. And we're not going to do a whole list, but I think we're just going to go through year by year by year and just look back at some of the biggest disappointments of the NFL since 2010. So with that, let's just begin. Should we start at 2023 or do you want to start at 2010 first?
Sure, we'll start at 2023. Just because it's fresh in everyone's mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're both pretty subjective when it comes to disappointments. Right away we could just go with our teams, but honestly, to me, it's got to be the Jaguars because, listen, you made the playoffs last year. You came back from a 27-0 deficit to win your first playoff game. And even though you came up short to the Chiefs in the next round, you were expected to win the division and get back to that same spot. And it looked like they were going to do that at 8-3, but then they completely collapsed. Their defense was abysmal. Their quarterback was turnover prone. The offense was never really in sync. And as a result, they lost, their final 4 of their final 5 games. The one win coming against the freaking Carolina Panthers, and they missed the playoffs via tiebreaker and lost out the division of the Houston Texans. And not only that, but you tied with the Indianapolis Colts, who you beat twice that year. So, to me, it's the Jaguars because even though I never really thought they were going to be conference championship contenders, you were at least expected to get back into the playoffs. And in that weak division with 3 teams that were literally rebuilding right before your very eyes, the Jaguars had no business missing the playoffs with all that talent and with all that experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a lot of teams that disappointed in 2023. Both of our teams, the Giants and the Patriots, are 2 really good contenders for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with one that kind of is a little bit of a – you look at their record on paper and you'd be like, oh, it's not really the expectations might have met it. But I'm going to go with the Eagles. I think they definitely are a team that, you look at the back half of the season and you're like, if they had started out like that, you would have been like, oh my God, they fully collapsed. But you see the 11-6 record, and you're like, they had a good season. But really, I think compared to their expectations, they really didn't. The defense was horrendous. Jalen Hurts, wasn't awful, but he was either, playing hurt or, just something wasn't clicking. And they have a huge coaching issue too. You got to assume that the coordinators they brought in could probably make that better, but I don't really think you can go into the season thinking Sirianni's like, I wouldn't say Eagles fans are as confident in Nick Sirianni as they were 365 days ago.
Nope.
But they made some big splashes this offseason. We'll probably get into another Eagles team later that made some big splashes. So that's might be why I'm a little cautiously, looking
excited.
At that. Because you can always make moves on paper, but we've seen. I mean, we're gonna go through these lists and like teams make signings that look good, and then it just kind of you keep going through, and it really just shows how you can't win and you can't build championship contenders through free agency. You can supplement it, but it's really you win through the draft. So I'm gonna go with the Eagles in this one. It's just gonna be interesting to see this year if that was really a sign of things to come, or if that was kind of like an outlier. So
yeah. I mean, that's not a bad pick. I mean, I don't know if I would have gone with them just because at least they made the playoffs, but at the same time, given the expectations that they had entering that season, I absolutely agree because at 10-1, it should have been a freaking wrap, and they completely fell apart. And now you're in the situation where you're questioning, is Jalen Hurts really the guy that's going to take us to another Super Bowl? Is Sirianni's seat still in a reasonable spot? How is the defense going to play under Vic Fangio? How's the offense going to play, with Kellen Moore? It's just really the Eagles are a team that should have everything in their power, every player at every position to make a deep run, but it just comes down to those two little things that you need that teams like the Chiefs and 49ers have that can take you over the hump. And honestly, it's just we don't know what the Eagles have in store for us. They absolutely can win the NFC East, but it's just how far are you going to get when the playoffs start? So I agree with that.
Yeah.
Let's go to 2022. And for me, this one is a no-brainer. It's the Broncos. I don't think this is even a question. I mean, you trade 3 players and a bunch of draft picks for the quarterback that's supposed to bring the Broncos back over the hump. You've already recycled, Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch and Drew Lock and Joe Flacco and Brandon Allen. Russell Wilson was literally supposed to be the missing piece. And even though he wasn't their guy at first because they hired Nathaniel Hackett to get Aaron Rodgers, I mean, Russell Wilson was not a bad consolation prize. And with all that talent on their defense and with a lot of talent on their offense, you were at least supposed to make the playoffs, just given the expectations. And Hackett doesn't even last throughout the entire season. Russell Wilson plays like trash. The defense was the only reason why they were competitive. Their offense was abysmal. Melvin Gordon kept fumbling everything in sight. And none of the players that were supposed to make an impact showed up when they were absolutely needed. A 5-12 season, the absolute definition of a failure, and 2 years later, Russell Wilson is no longer even on the team. So it is right now one of the worst trades in NFL history, and the only reason why it's not number one is because there's a quarterback in Cleveland that has something to say about that. So it's the Broncos, without a doubt.
Yep. I would definitely agree there. You pretty much nailed it. I think the one thing I will say about the Broncos is, I mean, the expectations obviously were high and they completely didn't meet them. But, Russell Wilson was definitely like on the decline the year before. So it was definitely like it wasn't like completely unprecedented. It was unprecedented that he was that bad. Like you assume like he wasn't going to be like 13 to 20. 15 Russell Wilson. Yeah, like that stretch really. But you assumed at least, it would bring the Broncos back to quarterback play that like was respectable. But it was even worse if that was even possible. So yeah, I think that's just really when you make a big trade like that, all eyeballs go on you. You trade for a Hall of Fame quarterback or at least Hall of Fame contending quarterback. I think all eyes are going to go on that team, and they won five. They won 5 games.
5-12. Yeah,
So I think you nailed it there.
I know. Broncos country. Let's ride. Like that is the worst aged line in the NFL in the last decade. Actually, I don't know. I can't really think of it right off the top of my head, but I think it's up there because again, Russell Wilson was literally supposed to be like the hero of their franchise, and he went from hero to GOAT in world record time. So, yeah, and that whole season was just an outright disaster and a train wreck. I don't think anything else needs to be said.
Yep.
All right. So we got through 2022. I think that was a slam dunk. 2023, there are a bunch of candidates. Let's go to 2021 because, to be quite honest, I don't really know which teams were considered quote unquote disappointments because it was just there weren't too many where you thought, holy crap, this team like had so many expectations and they blew it. But
yeah, no, I think the exact same thing. I think there's 2 different ways I feel like you could look at this. You can look at a team that so I'll bring up 2 because and you can look at it from 2 different perspectives. I think the one for me, I think you can honestly include another Russell Wilson led team. I think the Seahawks kind of were a pretty big disappointment this year. I know Wilson was hurt for a lot of the year, not a lot, but like a 6-game stretch of the year. But they were still supposed to be a playoff contender, and they won 7 games. So they're one that I think is definitely,
I actually have one. I completely forgot about it. The Chargers, with Justin Herbert and Brandon Staley. I mean, they completely blew it in that final game against the Raiders. And in overtime, if they did not call that timeout that allowed the Raiders to just get in a field goal range and kick the game-winning field goal, both them and the Raiders would have made the playoffs, and we wouldn't have to see the Steelers get their absolute you-know-what kicked out of them by the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah,
so
that's a good one. I mean, because there were high expectations for them too, so I think that's a really good one too. The other perspective I was going to take on it is if you wanted to think about a team that, like, you could honestly say it's weird because they were the number 1 seed, but the Green Bay Packers to lose to the Niners like the way they did, maybe you could say this is point because that was supposed to be like back-to-back MVPs for Rodgers, right? Like, so I think it's a disappointment in that regard, but I think it's hard to say they had like a disappointing season just because
that was kind of expected. Aaron Rodgers is going to choke in the playoffs. It's just what he does.
Yeah, that's fair. But I felt like to lose like if they lost in like a shootout, like that makes sense. Like they just imploded that. Like they were like the number 1 offense that year. So
what another team is? Washington, because you didn't really have a good quarterback. You dealt with Ryan Fitzpatrick and then Taylor Heineke, but also like their defense completely regressed.
Oh yeah,
and it was costing them a lot of games. And for them to not really have that much of a different record, it just goes to show like how truly bad they were in 2020. And also, I think your team with Joe Judge, it was a little bit of a disappointment because Joe Judge went from one of the hottest young coaches in the league after, a pretty decent 2020 season, went to like completely fired and canned because of his own idiocy, to be quite honest.
Yeah, a lot of interesting contenders this year. This was a weird year, but
yeah. Let us know who you think was more disappointing that year. Honestly, personally, I would say the Chargers just because it's like you have Justin Herbert and you let the Raiders back into the playoffs with everything that happened to them that year. Literally, it was such a freaking roller coaster with everything that was going on with them on and off the field. It was absurd. But let's actually go to 2020, which was still just a wild year to revisit. I was actually watching some old highlights from 2020, and it's just like seeing the stadium completely empty. It just made me realize, like, wow, I still can't believe we were ever in a pandemic. It's crazy. But
another weird year too. Like just everything that went on too. I mean, a lot of teams here too. I feel like.
Exactly. For 2020, who? Honestly, I don't think I can even go with one team per se. I'm going to go with the whole division. I'm going to go with the whole NFC East because it was absolutely pathetic. I mean, at least the Cowboys could say, you know what, Dak Prescott got hurt and we were never the same after that. And, it was Mike McCarthy thought it was a good idea to bring in Mike Nolan as the defensive coordinator. At least the Cowboys could say that. But, yeah, the Giants were okay. I mean, their defense was great, but their offense was trash. Washington, had an outstanding defense and a wonderful comeback story in Alex Smith, but you never really saw them as a legitimate playoff contender. And the Eagles saw Carson Wentz completely fall apart to the point where he got benched by Jalen Hurts, and Doug Peterson got himself fired by taking Jalen Hurts out of a winnable game in the regular season finale and replacing him with Nate Sudfeld. So, honestly, and they were dealing with a boatload of injuries at that time. So that whole division was outright trash. And at least Washington did enough to make it close against Tom Brady in the wild card round. But, I mean, whoever won that division was going to get sent home anyways. It was that terrible.
Yeah. No, I think definitely disappointment. I mean, I feel like going into that year, that division I thought was going to be kind of mid, regardless, but not that bad. Like, for no team to be able to pull away was kind of crazy. Washington kind of just like backed in.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose one team, I'd probably go with the Texans. With the amount of like primetime games they had that year, and how good they were the year before. I mean, they were up big versus the Chiefs in the divisional round. Yeah, they might have collapsed, but you knew with Deshaun Watson they were going to be a really good team, or you assume they were going to be. I mean, I know they traded DeAndre Hopkins that offseason, but when you have an elite quarterback or former elite quarterback, you assume that you're going to be like I think for example, like the Bills lost Diggs, but we still assume that the Bills are going to be a pretty good team because they have Josh Allen, a good coach.
Chiefs with Tyreek Hill.
Right. So, and even then, like, you didn't expect them to win only 4 games. Like, even if you expect them to regress a little bit, you didn't expect them to be like that under 500. And ultimately, they're in a good spot now. So I guess it's like kind of might have worked out for them. But I think I don't think Texans fans or any fan would have said, yeah, the Texans are going to be one of the worst teams in the league. So, I think that's one I'd go with. But yeah, I think the Eagles are definitely up there. No one expected Carson Wentz to fall off that hard. So yeah, again, weird year. It's hard to pinpoint one. So
it was. I mean, I could have said the Patriots, but I mean, I think everyone knew that once Tom Brady left, they were never going to be that good again. I mean, with the Texans, I mean, I think we all knew they were going to be screwed the minute they traded away DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know why they even did that in the first place, because that was literally Deshaun Watson's security blanket, and they traded him for an anchor contract of a running back that was injury-prone and was never the same again. And that's why Bill O'Brien got fired 4 games into the season. Like, he completely lost the locker room. The defense was trash. Deshaun Watson was the only thing that was keeping this team alive, and everybody else was just letting him down. The offensive line was still trash. Will Fuller got suspended because of a PED use. So, I mean, it was literally just Deshaun Watson all by himself that season. And I know a lot of people are going to be unhappy with that, just given everything that's happened after that season. But in 2020, like, Deshaun Watson was, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He led the league in passing yards, and he had one of the best passer ratings, and they still only won 4 games because everybody else was completely garbage. That's
wild.
Yeah, Deshaun Watson might not be a great person, and that's putting it lightly, but, I mean, can't really take away from what happened in 2020. Let's just say it like that. Let's go to 2019 here. I think it's pretty safe to move on. 2019 was pretty interesting because obviously, Lamar won his first MVP. The Chiefs ended up winning the Super Bowl. I mean, I'm just going through like the standings right now, and I'm just trying to like think, okay, which team that had big expectations, earlier in the year, did not live up to them. Obviously, you can point out the Cowboys. They went 8-8 again, and that ended up being Jason Garrett's final straw. You could bring up the Bears because, after the great season they had in 2018, their offense completely let them down. You could bring up the Jets with Adam Gase and Sam Darnold because you thought that, all right, Todd Bowles is gone. Let's see what the offensive genius could do with Sam Darnold. But to me, this one is so easy. I'm going with the Cleveland Browns here because when you're the Browns and you have a number 1 overall pick in Baker Mayfield, one of the best running backs in Nick Chubb, an awesome wide receiver duo of Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr., an offensive line that was starting to become one of the best in the league, and a defense full of playmakers, including Myles Garrett, you should be a playoff team. And they were nowhere near that. They were horribly undisciplined. Their offense kept sputtering in and out. Their defense never really hit its true form. Freddie Kitchens proved that he was overmatched and just nowhere near ready to be a head coach. And the only reason why he even got the job was because Baker wanted him. And what do you know? The Browns fire him. They fire their general manager. Baker Mayfield is, went from one of the promising young quarterbacks to a guy that is heading more towards a bust. And, they were pretty much forced to blow it up. I mean, that season was just so freaking hard and frustrating to watch, just given everything that happened with them. And, yeah, I don't think, given all the hype that they got in the offseason, I think it's a no-brainer that they were the most disappointing team that year because they should have been a playoff contender, and they only won 6 games.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. I think the few you mentioned are good. I think one that's kind of an underrated one is the Rams here. The Rams were in the Super Bowl year before, and then they missed the playoffs this year.
I mean, you could say that with every Super Bowl loser, though.
True. But, just kind of the thing with this is the end of that season, that 2018 season, Jared Goff started to, really regress under McVay's system. And that just kind of continued in 2019, too. And you kind of just were like, is Goff really the answer? Or is he just kind of a product of McVay's system? And then in 2020, you kind of – that's when McVay was like, all right, we need to go in a direction here.
They lost all confidence, yeah.
So this really was kind of the start of that, which is why I'd say it's disappointing. Obviously, it led to them getting Matthew Stafford, and they got a ring. So in hindsight, maybe it wasn't. But to miss the playoffs, having that loaded of a team, obviously it was a lot of aging veterans, but, Yeah,
and then Gurley got arthritis in his knee, unfortunately, and that completely ruined his career, tragically.
Yeah, that was unfortunate, too. You saw that in that playoff the year prior. So, I think that's one that I'd pick. I mean, the Bears are a good contender, too. I mean, they had a great season earlier. But I think for the Rams being in the Super Bowl and really showing being such a high-powered offense with a great defense, I think that's when it really was like, dang, what is the future here? And then they made the playoffs the year after, but then they got bounced. They lost the Packers, right? Yeah, lost the Packers in 2020. So, but – yeah, I'd probably go with the Rams here just because of the expectations surrounding them after being in that Super Bowl. So,
yeah, that's not a bad one. Again, I think you could say that with a lot of teams that lost the Super Bowl because it's like you think you could go out and do it again, but, you never realize how truly hard it is to get back to a championship, let alone win one. So, there are plenty of teams that have never been able to really fully grasp that. And with that, let's go to the 2018 season because you can really say that any team that made the playoffs in 2017 was considered a disappointment. I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers had Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, an awesome defense, and obviously you had Le'Veon Bell holding out, but it was too talented of a team for them not to make the make the playoffs. They were 7-2-1, and they completely collapsed and missed the playoffs with a 9-6-1 season. You could go to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who started that year 3-0. They still had an elite defense, but their offense completely wet the bed. Blake Bortles was terrible. Leonard Fournette, completely regressed. And they went 5-11 and had one of the worst seasons they've had in franchise history. The Minnesota Vikings, with Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, and Kyle Rudolph, and an outstanding defense, only went 8-7-1 because they couldn't beat the teams that they needed to beat to actually make a playoff push. And lastly, at least the last one that comes off the top of my head, the Carolina Panthers, they were 6-2. Cam Newton was having the best passing season of his career, and then he hurts his shoulder, and they completely collapsed, losing 7 out of their final 8 games. So you can say this with any 2018 team that was supposed to be back in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think the one that stands out to me, though, is the Jaguars. But the other two, at least the Vikings one was, at least you could make the argument that maybe they just had to be more of a cohesive unit, and they would take that step next year, which they did. The Steelers and the Panthers were more of just collapses. But I think the Jaguars are really the one that stands out, just because, they were that Saxonville defense. They were supposed to build on that, and Blake Bortles seemed like a guy who was never going to be elite, but he was a guy who was going to be able to, take advantage of, the opportunities the defense gave him. But ultimately, he was just himself. He collapsed. So that is, and starting out 3-0, right? You assume okay, they're going to be back to their dominance, but ultimately they only won 2 games out of the last 13. So and he was benched, and then he was cut. Bortles. It was a rough year for Blake Bortles. So
and they gave him a 3-year extension too.
Yeah.
That was the worst part. And then after that season, the Jaguars thought, "Oh, which quarterback can really help us out? Oh, Nick Foles. Let's just give him $50 million guaranteed," which ended up being worse than signing Bortles to that extension. So, great job.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty rare when you bring up the Jaguars in 2 different years as the most disappointing teams, because this year was way worse because they had everything. They had Jalen Ramsey, they had an awesome defense, they had Leonard Fournette and Keelan Cole. They had a lot of pieces to get back to the AFC Championship game, and their offense completely fell apart. And there was a lot of drama going on with their team too, because Leonard Fournette was definitely not happy with his role or with what was going on in Jacksonville. Blake Bortles was terrible. Jalen Ramsey was, definitely voicing his frustrations with the team. And, everything was just going wrong for them. So it wasn't really just the offense. It was just a multitude of factors. So another team to bring up, the Atlanta Falcons, because that offense was loaded with Matt Ryan and Tevin Coleman and Julio and Calvin Ridley. And they only went 7-9, but at the same time, so many injuries happened on that team. So I'll give them a little bit of a pass here. But let's go to 2017 and see which ones we could bring up, because
this one's easy for me.
This one's easy? Go for it. Oh, actually, it's actually easy for me too. I completely forgot, because I literally had my list right here, but I just wanted to bring it up. But I think we might have the same one in mind.
I think we might, because here's the thing. I
actually have 2 teams, but
I have 2 teams too. I have the Raiders and the Giants.
Yep, there you go. Let's actually, you want me to explain the Raiders, and then you can bring up the Giants?
The Raiders, I'll explain the Giants, because I have a lot of thoughts on that.
So heading into 2000, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there, but so in 2017, the Oakland Raiders were supposed to be back in the playoffs. They were just getting their franchise quarterback, Derek Carr, back from injury because he fractured his knee after what was looking to be a pretty promising MVP campaign. And, the minute that he got hurt, the team completely sunk. They had Amari Cooper. They had Latavius Murray. They had an outstanding offense. But really, everyone on the defensive side, Khalil Mack was an absolute transcendent talent. He was the defensive player of the year. And while the whole unit wasn't great itself, Khalil Mack was literally their engine and their heartbeat. And the minute that Derek Carr got hurt, all their hopes sank into the water. But in 2017, they were supposed to be back in the playoffs. They had plenty of talent to make another run. Jack Del Rio proved that he wasn't too terrible of a coach. But everything completely fell flat on its face. Derek Carr had a hard time, recovering from his injury. There was never really a running game. The passing game was never in sync. And the defense was so bad to the point that it didn't have a single interception until week 11. And that ended up getting the defensive coordinator fired as a result. So they went 6-10. Jack Del Rio got fired. They hired John Gruden. And, they never made it back to the playoffs until 2021 when Gruden got freaking fired. So, yeah, the Raiders went from having the third highest odds to win the Super Bowl in the preseason to a team that was not even above 500. So that's me. Let's hear what TJ's got to say about the 2017 Giants. Here, let me do a close up.
I think with the Giants, I think the thing with them is they went 11-5 the year prior, right? And they had one of the best red zone defenses that season. And I think, that was mainly because of all the additions. So this really is like a 2-year kind of thing, right? In 2015, they were a really good offense. They had Odell. Eli was playing good football. Odell kind of like saved his career essentially. They had a, decent run game with Rashad Jennings. He wasn't like an all-pro or anything like that, but he was a solid running back. The offensive line was always a question mark, but I think Eli kind of magnified that because he was of his like lessened mobility. But their defense was really bad in 2015. So what they do, they spent like $150 million. They got Snacks Harrison, Janoris Jenkins, Olivier Vernon. Like they got some names, and it paid off for 1 year. In 2016, they had an amazing defense. Ben McAdoo was looking like the future at coach. But then in 2017, they showed how unsustainable their method was. Just signing a bunch of players and hoping it sticks. Not necessarily signing scheme fits, and just kind of like just acquiring talent did not work. And Eli regressed. Odell got hurt. A lot of people got hurt. I think Shep was hurt for a little bit. Like everyone got hurt, so that definitely didn't help. But the team was looking bad even before everyone got hurt. And Eli was playing not great, bad actually. And then McAdoo got fired midseason because he benched Eli for Geno versus the Raiders in midseason. And then ultimately, Spagnuolo left that year too because it's kind of just like the defense regressed too, and they decided to clean house. And, I think it just kind of shows that they should have been trying to move off Eli earlier, or at least find a replacement, and they did it a little too late, I guess. So, yeah, that season really was just the beginning of just like a bad stretch of years, just because of like how it just really goes to show like you cannot just like build these teams in free agency, and that's where a lot of these disappointments stem from, because teams have such high expectations. They think you spend a bunch of money, like it's totally gonna work, but man, like this was just a collapse if I've ever seen one before, especially considering they made the playoffs. I mean, they had an awful playoff game the year before, but you had to assume like that defense was gonna continue to be good, and they just were not. So
yeah, not only did McAdoo get fired, but Jerry Reese got fired as well, because I mean the moves that he had made since they won the Super Bowl in 2011, they kept blowing up in his face. I mean, drafting Eric Flowers, drafting Eli Apple, like not really stabilizing with the offense. Like his moves were just getting worse and worse by the year, and I mean his time pretty much just ran out in New York. I mean, I think you have everything to thank him for, because I mean you guys ended up winning 2 Super Bowls with him, but at the same time, I think
a lot of those
everything ran its course.
A lot of those teams were built by a Corsi, like Jerry Reese. Jerry Reese made some good moves, but like a lot of the nucleus was built with the Corsi's players.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and Jerry Reese, he made some good moves. So, not trying to take like a ton away from him, but like those later stretch of moves, I mean, just awful.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can even say 2017, right? Like not doing their due diligence on quarterbacks. I mean, there were rumors that like McAdoo wanted Mahomes and wanted to at least entertain that, and they just decided not to. So, and then they ended up taking Evan Ingram that year, just over TJ Watt, over Ryan Ramczyk, like just a slew of just moves that ultimately have put the Giants in the position they are in today. So,
yeah, I can't debate with you on that. But let's go to 2000. Sorry, voice crack. What the heck? Let's go to 2016 because obviously it was a fun year for me because we ended up winning a championship that year, but not so fun for a lot of different teams. In 2016 is really tough because there are some teams where you could be like, yeah, they definitely should have made the playoffs, but honestly, like you could say the Carolina Panthers, but Cam Newton hurt his shoulder. And you could say maybe the Philadelphia Eagles, but then again, Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson were in their first year, so you can at least give them the pass. Like, okay, they're just trying to, get on the same page this early in their careers. I don't know. This one is hard for me to pick out, but technically, I'll say. I'll say the Eagles and definitely the Vikings because they were 5-0 and they went 8-8 the rest of the way. But there weren't really any teams where like, holy crap, how did this team not make the playoffs?
Yeah, I feel like the Panthers are a team to bring up here just because of because Cam got hurt, but he also you got to assume the regression is a little bit with the injury too. But the whole team kind of just regressed.
Yeah, and they lost a lot of players that offseason. Josh Norman signed that huge deal with Washington. I think that was the year they drafted James Bradbury, too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, 2016.
And, their offense was not really the same as it was the year before. So they were really just losing a lot of key players, and they were just trying to figure things out on the fly. But
yeah. No, it's tough. That's a tough year just because, like you said, and plus a lot of the teams that we expected to be good ended up making it. But I would say that, if you're in the Super Bowl and when you win MVP, Cam won MVP, like you expected him to be a little better than he was. So I think it's just, I don't know.
Actually, what's a good team to bring up? The Indianapolis Colts, because they faced third in the division and you had Andrew Luck as your quarterback. And why were they third in their division? Because their O-line was abysmal and their defense was one of the worst in football. So Andrew Luck, in his already wasted and ruined career thanks to terrible management, couldn't even make the playoffs. And they lost out to freaking Brock Osweiler and Marcus Mariota. Yeah, Andrew Luck deserved so much better in his career. The minute that Ryan Grigson and Chuck Pagano were running the ship in Indianapolis, it was just going to be an outright disaster, and that's what ended up happening. So, that's why I will never enjoy the Colts having too much success because Jim Irsay let this all happen under his watch. So,
yeah, no, I like that one too. I think that's definitely a good one.
Yeah, that was a hard one. There's never really one that you could significantly pinpoint one team because there were a few ones that were like, okay, I guess, but there wasn't one that completely stuck out of my mind. But
yeah.
Anyways, let's see about 2015.
2015.
Oof.
Oh, I kind of have one here. I was looking at this earlier.
Okay.
This obviously has to do with injuries because they suffered a lot of injuries, but I'm gonna go with the Ravens here. With how they did in 2014, they kept it close.
I wouldn't go with the Ravens. Terrell Suggs got hurt. Joe Flacco got hurt.
Yeah,
Steve Smith tore his knee. There were too many injuries that completely derailed them. Like Jimmy Clausen was starting for them. That's how bad it got.
I get that, but with how good they were the year prior. 5 and they went from what were they the year before? I think they were 11.
They were 10-6.
Yeah, but then they made it to what? They made it to the AFC Championship or the divisional round?
No, divisional.
Because the Patriots
played
the Colts.
They had a 14-point lead, and then the Patriots came all the way back to win.
So it was okay, maybe next year they'll, maybe get the Pats again and be able to, But no, all of their key players, or it was Flacco and Suggs, or Suggs tore his ACL, right? Or
I think so. Yeah. I forgot what the injury was per se, but hold on, let me pull this up.
That team started off bad too. That team was honestly better. They started out 2-8,
2-7.
Yeah, they were not they were not a
Yeah,
good team.
Terrell Suggs had a torn Achilles. That's what it was.
Yeah. So
And then against Cincinnati, I think Steve Smith tore his knee.
yeah. So I would definitely say that's kind of the most, disappointing year.
Oh, no, against San Diego. I'm sorry. It was against San Diego. He ruptured his Achilles, and then I'm trying to remember when Joe Flacco got hurt. But anyways, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't even remember when Joe Flacco got hurt.
I forgot what it was that. What was it that he hurt?
Yeah, I don't even remember the injury, but Flacco.
It was a knee injury.
It was later in the season too. So
Mhm.
Flacco was not good the start of the year either. So I think that's definitely one to look, especially considering they were in the Super Bowl 2 years prior. So
I mean, you could say the same thing for the Cowboys. I mean, they were 4-12, but Tony Romo fractured his collarbone twice. So that's obviously one I can't really look over. And Des Bryant got hurt too earlier in that season, so he missed a good amount of time. So, I mean, you could obviously bring that one up. I'm trying to think who else. I mean, the Chargers were 4-12. I mean, anytime you have Phillip Rivers, that's obviously pretty shocking.
yeah,
I mean,
Chargers always disappoint though.
I think the Falcons are definitely a good one because, I mean, it was Dan Quinn's first year. They were undefeated to start the season, and they went 8-8 and missed the playoffs. And they had a terrible coaching decision against the 49ers that, completely ruined any chance that they had. So, yeah, again, it's just like 2016. There's not really one they can really pinpoint because it's like, okay, they had a shot, but we never really had too many expectations for them, right?
Yeah. That's
So
fair.
that's probably what I would say. In 2014, though, I actually have one that comes to mind, and that's the San Francisco 49ers because, I mean, they made the NFC Championship from 2011 to 2013. You thought, okay, even if they don't get back to the conference championship game, you at least expect them to be a playoff contender. But Colin Kaepernick regressed as a passer. The defense, I mean, the offense was starting to deal with a lot of injuries. Actually, both sides of the ball were starting to deal with a lot of injuries. They were never really the powerhouse that they were over that 3-year span where they were ripping people's hearts out and going to the playoffs. And they finished 8-8. And then after that season, Jim Harbaugh gets thrown under the bus. He gets thrown out the door to Michigan, where he ends up saving their whole program. And that's where they promote Jim Tomsula to be their full-time head coach, where Trent Baalke completely won a power struggle that didn't need to exist in the first place. And then 2 years later, they thought, you know what, let's hire Chip Kelly and go 2-14. So, yeah, I would probably say the 49ers because they were a team with a lot of promise, and it was Jim Harbaugh's team, but greedy management said, nope, this is my team. I want to run things here from now on. So,
Yeah. They also, they just kind of collapsed the end of the season too. Like they were 7-4, and then they
yeah,
4. It was very similar to the Eagles season from this past year. Team with a lot of expectations, and then ultimately just some bad defense and just offensive playmakers the offense is just unable to score points too. So yeah, I think, and plus like Kaepernick's regression was really just like taking unnecessary sacks, interceptions, fumbles, like all that stuff was just just kind of really was brought to light in this season. So yeah, I think I would agree with that one too.
The Eagles are actually a pretty good one too, but I mean, Nick Foles got hurt in the middle of that season, so I could definitely give them a pass for that because at least you want to see like how they would have been able to do. But then again, Chip Kelly was the head coach there, and let's just say there's a reason why everyone on the Eagles hated Chip Kelly, including LaShawn McCoy, Deshaun Jackson, and Jeremy Maclin. I mean, those were like the 3 top guys that really had a vendetta against Chip Kelly, and vice versa.
To this day.
Because to this day, I mean, if you've seen that clip on LaShawn McCoy's podcast, yeah, they don't like Chip Kelly. And why would they? Because, I mean, yeah, he was really good at college, could not do anything worth a damn in the NFL. So,
yeah.
And also, same thing with the Kansas City Chiefs because they were a team that was, I think, 6-2 or 7-3 at that point of the season. Let me pull this up. Yeah, they were 7-3 in 2014, and they ended up finishing 9-7 and they missed the playoffs. So I guess that definitely counts. But the 49ers are really the team that I thought of first because it's like, with all the success that they've had over the past few years, it's really shocking that things went sideways that quickly. But, I mean, safe to say that they're doing fine right now.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, they always find ways. I mean, and it's always because they're just their team. They don't even – I feel like the 49ers always – I mean, outside like the previous days when they had like Montana and Young, like they find ways to win even if their quarterback isn't the most special player, but they have good coaching and always really talented surrounding players. So
they do.
I'd say that.
Yeah, they're definitely a very fortunate franchise. Let's go to 2013 here and see who we could pinpoint. For me, I think this one is pretty clear because they ended up being the worst team in football that season, and that is the Houston Texans. Because the year before, they were 12-4. J.J. Watt, I think J.J. Watt was the defensive player of the year at that time. They had one of the best running backs in Arian Foster. Andre Johnson was at the pinnacle of his career. They had just drafted, I think this was the year they drafted DeAndre Hopkins, 2013. And, Gary Kubiak was a pretty solid head coach. And they started that year 2-0. You thought, okay, we're going to pick things up right where they left off. And then right after that, they lost 14 straight. And I know Matt Schaub got hurt, and that's why they had to play Case Keenum. But, oh, my God, it was by far like one of the most surprising, terrible seasons I've ever seen. And then I think Kubiak got fired in the middle of that. Wade Phillips took over for the final 3 games, and that was when they hired Bill O'Brien to be their full-time guy. So, yeah, it was just shocking that for a team that started 2-0, for them to lose 14 straight due to a multitude of factors, it was horrible. It was just absolutely horrific. So,
yeah, that's even worse.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, that was the one I was going to bring up too. But this is even worse than just a regular disappointment. This is a full-on just like just down. I don't even know how you describe it. But to start 2-0, like they start 2-0, and you're like, oh, okay, well, here they go. The Texans. I mean, they added DeAndre Hopkins. Like they're going to be a really good contender to knock off the Patriots. But nope, they lost 14 straight games, and like a lot of them. I mean, some of them were close, but like a lot of them were just like they just got like steamrolled. Like I'm looking at their schedule right now, they got crushed by the Niners, they got crushed by the Ravens, they got crushed by the Colts. Like they were bad.
Yeah, really bad. I mean, the Falcons were really disappointed that season too because 2012 they were 13-3. They went to the NFC Championship and they went 4-12. But you could say they had too many injuries to deal with as well. I mean, I think Julio Jones hurt his knee and only played like 5 games. Several guys on their defense couldn't play. I mean, at least you could say, well, they didn't have Julio and they lost a lot of key guys on their defense. But, I mean, at the same time, it was just like.
Yeah. They also didn't lose 14 straight games in a row.
Yeah. There you go. That was my point exactly. So, holy crap. And then Mike Smith ended up getting fired from Atlanta in 2014. So, I mean. Honestly, that was just – those are the 2 teams that really I thought at first. But, yeah, the Texans, you lose 14 straight after being 2-0 and hailed as an instant playoff contender. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. It is a no-brainer. Let's go to 2012 here and go back to that season. And if you remember, I think it was a Hall of Fame anniversary because you remember those patches that they had, dedicating the Hall of Fame. I think it was some milestone. I forgot how many years it had been. But the point is, 2012 didn't present too many disappointing teams, but there were definitely a couple to point out. I'm actually going to go with your team here, the New York Giants, because, I mean, I know that you lost a lot of guys in free agency. You lost Brandon Jacobs. You lost Mario Manningham. But at the same time, you were the defending Super Bowl champions. You started off 6-2. It looked like, okay, we're going to be right back where we were last year, win the division, and, just make sure that we do enough in the playoffs to win a lot of games. And that ended up not happening because while they finished with the same record, turns out that Washington had other plans, particularly Robert Griffin III.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really just that, but it was also, the defense never really had a pass rush. The running game couldn't really take off. Eli Manning couldn't muster up the late game clutchness that he had, throughout his entire career.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm missing anything, but it was just, given that type of a start, I would expect that, okay, you're going to be right back in that same spot, but it just didn't happen that way because they didn't play enough. They didn't play well enough to get back into the playoffs.
Just some bad collapses. Like, not even just the season was a bad collapse. Just they had some games where they had bad collapses too. And just like to win the Super Bowl the year before, you were like, and plus when you have that start right, like 6-2. I was just like they lost to they got blown out by some teams too, and you were like, damn, But they had some good wins too towards the end of the season. It was just like to end up
too little, too late.
Yeah, too little, too late. Like they beat the Eagles. They shelled them by 40 the last game of the season. They got in a shootout with the Saints and won that one. But then they got blown out by the Falcons too, like by 30 points. So it was so inconsistent. Just a huge collapse. But another one I want to bring up, I think, is the Saints. They had the
Saints
defense was absolutely atrocious that year. Gave up. I don't know if they still hold the record, but they gave up the most passing yards that year. I don't know if they still hold the record, but they did hold that record for a little bit at least. They went 13-3 the year before in 2011, and then this year in 2012 they went 7-9 just because of how horrible their defense was. So another contender there, but I think those are two good ones.
Yeah, and Sean Payton was suspended that 2012 season because of what happened at Bountygate and just how disgusting their whole operation was. So, their defense was absolutely hot garbage. And ironically, Steve Spagnuolo was the defensive coordinator of that Saints defense. It wasn't Rob Bryant. But, Drew Brees had a 5,000-yard season, 43 touchdown passes, and they still only won 7 games. And if Sean Payton wasn't suspended, I think we would have gotten the same results just because that defense was absolutely trash. But I think you could say that with any Saints team from 2012 to 2016. A team with a Hall of Fame quarterback, an outstanding head coach, an offense that is supposed to be in the top 10 every year, and then somehow only goes 7-9 because your defense either sucks or something else happens along the way that just completely holds you back from your potential. So
Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers had some. I don't know why I'm bringing up Aaron. Those are the two.
I agree with you there, Mike. People give Aaron Rodgers a pass for how bad his defenses are. Drew Brees are significantly worse. And especially in the playoffs, because since that Super Bowl, it's been the Beastquake, the Catch 3, the Minneapolis Miracle. Kirk Cousins in overtime, and then Tom Brady.
Yeah.
And also, I'm missing another one. Seattle against the Legion of Boom in 2013. Right. But then again, their offense, screwed up at the end by throwing a forward pass on a lateral play. But at the same time, it was just it's just so much bad luck for Drew Brees. He definitely deserved more than one championship. And I know that he kind of fell off a cliff, towards the end of his career. But at the same time, it was just that dude will be in the same conversation as Dan Marino and Aaron Rodgers, guys that definitely should have won a lot more, but just didn't have the team to really get it done. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. So we're heading towards the finish line here, and I think now that we're in 2011. I think we can finally talk about it. So, in that year, the Philadelphia Eagles were coming off an NFC East title. Michael Vick had a career resurgence the minute that he got the starting job in the middle of the season. He flat out carried them back to the playoffs with his arm and his legs. They had LaShawn McCoy, one of the most underrated and one of the, I wouldn't say underrated, but one of the shiftiest and nastiest running backs of that entire class. There was a reason why they call him Shady McCoy, because anytime that you had to face up against him one-on-one, he was going to make you fall down. They had Deshaun Jackson, the fastest receiver in the league. They had Jeremy Maclin. Their defense definitely needed a little bit of an oomph, but they were a team that was supposed to be back in the playoffs, and some were even hailing them as Super Bowl contenders in that offseason because they signed cornerback Nnamdi Asomugha to a big deal. They signed Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. They brought in Jason Babin. They brought in Ronnie Brown. They signed Vince Young to be their backup quarterback. And during that training camp, Vince Young dubbed this team the Dream Team. And for whatever reason, it was plastered on every single newspaper. And who can really blame them? Because they had a team that could definitely make a huge run. I mean, you had Michael Vick, LaShawn McCoy, Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, Andy Reid. Like, your defense signed one of the best quarterbacks in the league at that time. And it was nowhere near a dream team. They started off 1-4, then they were 4-8. Then they finished that year not making the playoffs. And it wasn't even just the fact that they missed the playoffs, but Nnamdi Asomugha was a complete flop of a signing that got exposed in coverage every single time. The offense never really had the explosive energy that we were expected to see, throughout the 3 months of the offseason. And while there were a lot of flashes, they were still 8-8. 1 year later, they were 4-12. And Andy Reid got fired. So This one has to be definitely in the top two. If it's not one, then it's definitely number two. Because for you to be called the Dream Team and to not even make the playoffs, it's nowhere near a successful season. You have to be right at the top and the most disappointing because you guys put yourselves in that situation.
Yeah, it wasn't even the record either. It definitely that's a big part of it. It was just how bad their free agents. Like, it wasn't like their free agent signings. Oh, they were kind of just mediocre. No,
Asomugha couldn't cover anybody.
Yeah, Babin wasn't good. I think their best signing that year probably was like Evan Mathis because he lasted the longest. The guard. But yeah, man, just and for them to be just proclaim themselves as the dream team and not even make the playoffs like you mentioned, that's definitely the one that I'd say. I think that's.
It was actually also the year where they drafted Jason Kelce. That's actually a fun thing to bring up.
Okay, but yeah.
I mean, on paper they should have. Actually, let me look up their Super Bowl odds and see where they were.
It had to have been the top 2 or 3, right? You got to.
It's definitely got to be in the top 5. Super Bowl odds. They were third. The Packers were at second, which is fair because they were the defending Super Bowl champions. And then number 1 were the Patriots, which was pretty obvious why.
Makes sense, yeah.
All right. I think we're in agreement. Dream team? Yeah. Slam dunk, no doubt. Actually, before we get to 2010, I just want to bring up one final honorable mention. Let's just talk about the Dallas Cowboys from 2011 to 2013 because all 3 regular season finales, all they had to do was win, and they would make the playoffs, and they lost every single time to the Giants in 2011, who ended up winning the Super Bowl, to RG3 in 2012, and then to Philadelphia in 2013. All of them 8-8. And all Jason Garrett had to do was this.
Yep. I have friends and family members that are Cowboys fans, and they say, and a lot of them have been watching the Cowboys since like the 80s, and they say that is the worst stretch of Cowboys years they have ever watched, which is saying a lot because there's been some bad year or like some very mediocre years, but that is tough because when you just have to win, that is rough. So
I actually have a
good mention.
Yeah, I actually have a fun trivia question for you, and then I promise we'll get into this. Who is the last drafted Broncos quarterback? Who is the last Broncos quarterback that was drafted by that team to win a playoff game for them?
Was it Elway?
Nope, it was not Elway. He was drafted by the Baltimore Colts, and then he got traded to Denver.
Oh, so it was Tebow then?
It was Tebow. And the reason why I'm bringing up...
It wasn't draft.
Yeah.
Remind me on that. Trick question, man.
I said last drafted Broncos player. Yeah, he got drafted by the Colts. He wanted nothing to do with them. And ironically, Ernie Accorsi was the general manager of the Baltimore Colts. And then Elway's like, you know what? If you guys are not going to trade me, I'm going to go play baseball. I'm going to go play for the New York Yankees. And then time has passed, and then he got traded to the Denver Broncos. And then right after, I think the Colts moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis. Yeah. So, yeah. But the reason why I brought up Tim Tebow was because the 2012 Jets were just an absolute circus show, because that was actually when they got Tim Tebow to compete with Mark Sanchez, and that was the year the butt fumble happened.
Yep.
So I don't think it was the most disappointing team in that 2012 season, but I just thought it was really hilarious how Jets fans thought, oh my God, we're going to win. Tebow's on our team. Yeah, no. He couldn't throw with a damn in Denver, and he was not going to do a damn thing for you with the Jets. So,
yeah.
All right. Anyways, let's go to 2010. And for me, this one is pretty easy too. Imagine a team that missed the playoffs, but it was not because of the offense or the defense. Yeah, I'm not butchering this. The Chargers in 2010 had the number 1 ranked offense and the number 1 defense, and they missed the playoffs. Why? Because of their special teams and the horrible start that they had because of that special teams unit. They started off 2-5, even with their offense and defense outgaining them in every conceivable category, and they still lost because of their special teams. Let me just point these out, because I was watching like a docuseries on this, and I wanted to write all this stuff down because I knew I was going to do a show with you about this. In week 1, they gave up 3 huge punt returns. One of them was returned for a touchdown. They lost that game by 7 points. Week 3, they had a second half. They gave up a second half kickoff touchdown and a fourth quarter kickoff touchdown. They ended up losing that game by 7. Week 5, they gave up 2 blocked punts on back-to-back drives to give up 9 points. They lost that game by 8. Week 6, a huge punt return in the fourth quarter and a blocked field goal. They lost that game by 3. Week 7, another huge punt return. They lost by 3. So if it wasn't for their horrible special teams unit, especially through those first 7 to 8 games of the season, the Chargers would have been in the freaking playoffs. Like, Phillip Rivers had one of the best seasons of his career, and this was with the rotating carousel at the wide receiver position. Their defense was absolutely electric with Ron Rivera and Eric Weddle and the whole crew, and they still only went 9-7.
Yeah, that's one of the crazier stats I think ever in NFL history. I think that, and like I don't remember the year, but there's a year recently where like the Chiefs like didn't complete a pass to a receiver throughout the entire season. Those 2 stats to me are like some of the craziest ever. But
no, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I think this is 2014 where Alex Smith didn't throw a touchdown pass to a wide receiver. Yeah. That's what it was.
Yeah. Those 2 stats are nuts, but the Chargers one is crazy. Like to be the number 1 ranked offense, number 1 ranked defense, you'd think, oh, they're the 2008 or the 2008
Super Bowl contender.
But that clearly wasn't the case. So,
oh my God. Yeah, and as a Patriots fan, I could definitely say that 2010 was definitely one of the most heartbreaking, and 2007 is number 1. But 2010, I mean, Tom Brady was the first unanimous MVP. We had the best defense. And this was without a defensive coordinator. Like, you got to remember, we did not have a defensive coordinator in 2010. And Bill Belichick still won Coach of the Year because of that. Yeah. I mean, they went 14-2. Rob Gronkowski was a beast. And Wes Welker still had a productive season. We had literally traded away Randy Moss in the middle of the year. And, you know, we lost to the freaking Jets in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that one's definitely not fun to relive, but you know, what can you do? I think we got through all of them. Are there any teams that we missed out on? Did we get to all the ones we wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think we got through all the ones that were at least were. I don't really think there's any contenders that beat the ones we talked about, especially I mean, if you had to rank all the ones we talked about, I think the Eagles are the most disappointing. That 2011 one, just unprecedented to have an off season like that, and everyone proclaiming you the
dream team. Yeah, I think it's got to be number 1 because the 2010 Chargers were just flat out surprising. But I mean, no one was really giving them like too many expectations heading into 2010 to the way the Eagles were in 2011. Yeah, exactly. It was just, at least the Chargers proved that they were a legitimate team. It was just their special teams playing like absolute trash. With the Eagles, everything went wrong for them. And it ended up costing Andy Reid his job a couple years later. But to be fair, it ended up working out for him in Kansas City because he actually won 3 championships. Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for additional content. We're in the dead period of the off season, so we definitely have a lot of fun ideas coming our way. In a couple months, we're going to be starting to be doing season previews. But in the meantime, we still got a lot of fun and juicy ideas to run by us. So we hope you all have a great rest of your week. And we hope you all had an awesome Memorial Day as well. So we'll see you in June. Peace, everybody.